The information in this video comes from thorough research. Please share your thoughts on the video, the relationship between the church and witchcraft in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think. Witchcraft vanishes before knowledge, as the owl before the dawn. Victor Hugo. The relationship between the church and witchcraft, a historical analysis. The history of the church's relationship with witchcraft is long, complex, and often fraught with fear, persecution, and power struggles. From early Christian opposition to pagan practices to the infamous witch hunts of the early modern period, the church played a pivotal role in shaping societal perceptions of witchcraft. What began as theological disagreements evolved into violent inquisitions and executions, affecting tens of thousands across Europe and beyond. Witchcraft in pre-Christian Europe. Before the spread of Christianity, indigenous religions in Europe commonly involved nature-based spiritual practices, including folk magic, divination, and healing rituals. Many of these practices were deeply embedded in local culture and passed down orally through generations. Witchcraft, as it was later labeled by Christian authorities, was not seen as inherently evil in many pagan cultures. Instead, it often served healing, agricultural, or spiritual purposes. Cunning folk, wise women, and shamans were respected members of their communities. However, this began to change with the rise of Christianity. The early church and paganism. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire and beyond, it encountered these local religions and sought to suppress them. The church viewed pagan rituals as threats to its authority and as evidence of idolatry and demonic influence. Over time, a clear dichotomy was established. Christianity was associated with divine truth and salvation, while paganism, and by extension, magic, was seen as heresy and evil. Church fathers such as St. Augustine and St. Jerome condemned magic and divination as the work of the devil. In their view, magic was not simply misguided or foolish. It was an active collaboration with demonic forces. This theological position would shape church policy for centuries. Theological foundations of anti-witchcraft doctrine. Christian theology regarding witchcraft has its roots in both the Bible and the writings of influential theologians. The Bible, verses such as Exodus 22, verse 18, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," were interpreted literally by church authorities. Deuteronomy also condemned diviners, enchanters, and necromancers. St. Augustine. He argued that all magical activity was a deception of demons. Even if a spell or ritual appeared to work, it was merely the devil's trickery. Thomas Aquinas. In the 13th century, Aquinas reinforced the idea that magic was real and that it was powered by demons. He categorized witchcraft under the sin of superstition and emphasized its moral and theological danger. These ideas provided a religious justification for the suppression and punishment of suspected witches. The rise of heresy and the Inquisition. From the 12th century onward, the church began to focus more heavily on identifying and eradicating heresies. The Cathars, Waldensians, and other groups that challenged the authority or theology of the church were targeted in campaigns of suppression. The Inquisition, established in the 13th century, was initially aimed at rooting out heresy, but eventually came to target witches as well. Heretics and witches alike were seen as threats not only to the faith, but to the stability of Christian society. The tools of the Inquisition, interrogation, torture, forced confessions, and execution, would later be applied with increasing frequency to accused witches. The late Middle Ages and changing perceptions. While early church authorities were somewhat skeptical about the existence of organized witch cults, attitudes shifted in the late Middle Ages. Several developments contributed to this transformation. Black Death, 1347 to 1351, the devastating impact of the plague led to widespread fear, suspicion, and a desire to find scapegoats. Political fragmentation. As Europe fractured into competing kingdoms and territories, accusations of witchcraft were sometimes used for political gain. Papal decrees. In 1484, Pope Innocent VIII issued the papal bull Summis Desiderans Effectibus, which acknowledged the reality of witchcraft and gave inquisitors full authority to pursue witches. This laid the groundwork for one of the darkest chapters in church history, the witch hunts. The witch hunts of early modern Europe. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, Europe experienced a dramatic increase in witch hunts, fueled by church-sanctioned theology, local politics, and mass hysteria. Tens of thousands were tried and executed, most of them women. The Malleus Maleficarum. In 1487, two Dominican inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Springer, published Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. This infamous text served as a manual for identifying, interrogating, and punishing witches. It combined religious doctrine, misogyny, and pseudoscience. The Malleus portrayed witches as dangerous enemies of the church and civilization, capable of flying, killing children, causing storms, and copulating with demons. It heavily emphasized the threat posed by female witches and was used widely by both church and secular authorities. The role of gender in witch trials. The church's persecution of witchcraft disproportionately targeted women. Approximately 75 to 85% of those executed for witchcraft were female. This was not coincidental. Christian theology, especially under the influence of thinkers like Aquinas and the authors of the Malleus, often linked women to sin and temptation, drawing from the story of Eve. Women were seen as more susceptible to demonic influence due to their supposed moral weakness, emotional instability, and sexuality. Midwives, widows, and healers, women who lived on the margins of society or held knowledge outside church control, were especially vulnerable. Witch trials in Europe. Case studies. Germany. Germany was the epicenter of the European witch craze, with thousands of trials and executions. The fragmentation of the Holy Roman Empire created a patchwork of laws and authorities, allowing inquisitors to operate with impunity. France and Italy. Inquisitorial courts in southern Europe were often more skeptical of witchcraft claims than their northern counterparts. However, sporadic outbreaks of persecution still occurred. Scotland and England. In Scotland, witch hunts were especially brutal under Protestant reformers who, despite breaking from Rome, retained many of the church's teachings on demonic witchcraft. England's trials were more localized and driven by community accusations. Salem, Massachusetts. Though not under the direct authority of the Catholic Church, the Salem witch trials of 1692 to 1693 were deeply influenced by Christian theology. They reflect how church doctrines on witchcraft continued to shape the New World. Opposition and skepticism. Not all church leaders supported the witch hunts. Some theologians, jurists, and bishops opposed the more extreme measures. Critics argued that confessions extracted under torture were unreliable and that mass hysteria was leading to injustice. Figures like Johann Weyer, a Dutch physician, argued that accused witches were often mentally ill. Others, like Reginald Scott, challenged the theological basis for witch hunts. Despite these objections, the institutional church largely supported or tolerated the persecution. The decline of witch hunts. By the late 17th and early 18th centuries, belief in witchcraft began to wane among the educated elite. Several factors contributed. Scientific revolution, rational inquiry, and the rise of empiricism weakened the belief in magic and demons. Legal reform. Torture was gradually outlawed, and evidentiary standards and trials improved. Changing theology. The church began to emphasize God's mercy and moved away from the fire and brimstone doctrines that had fueled witch hunts. Though the church never officially renounced its anti-witchcraft teachings, it gradually stopped supporting active persecution. Witchcraft and the church in the modern era. Today, the Catholic Church does not officially recognize witchcraft as a real supernatural force. It views occult practices as spiritually dangerous, but does not support violent persecution. The Catechism of the Catholic Church warns against divination, sorcery, and occultism, but emphasizes spiritual guidance over punishment. In some parts of the world, especially in Africa and Latin America, accusations of witchcraft still occur, sometimes with deadly consequences. While the Church officially condemns such violence, local clergy may play complex roles in these cases. Cultural legacy and reflection. The legacy of the Church's relationship with witchcraft is still visible today in literature, film, folklore, and societal attitudes. From Shakespeare's Macbeth to modern TV shows like The Witcher, the archetype of the witch remains potent. Feminist scholars have reclaimed the image of the witch as a symbol of resistance against patriarchal and ecclesiastical oppression. The historical persecution of witches is now often interpreted as a form of gender violence and spiritual colonization. The Church's centuries-long crusade against witchcraft was shaped by fear, theology, politics, and cultural change. While it began as a campaign to defend orthodoxy and spiritual purity, it evolved into a widespread system of control that left thousands dead and millions fearful. Understanding this history is crucial, not only to grasp the evolution of Christian thought, but to prevent similar moral panics in the future. The Church today has distanced itself from its most extreme past actions, yet the echoes of those dark times continue to shape how we view magic, heresy, gender, and spiritual autonomy. If you have any experiences related to this topic, be sure to share them with us. Until the next episode, be mindful of the energies around you.